Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya cha vaidagena yopakrotam pravaram muninam padanjali pranjali ranatosmi stuve padanjalim vyasam shankaram cha munitrayam kartra sutrasya bhashyasya kramat vivaranasya cha. We are discussing the Vibhuti-pada. Some time back I mentioned that these the Yoga Sutras are not always very well organized. I mean, they are not very compact. These sutras are frequently interrelated. One sutra in one context could be related to some other sutras in the same chapter or maybe in another chapter. All this happens. So we were discussing this important subject of the three transformations of mind. That is Samadhi Parinama, Ekagrita Parinama, and Nirodha Parinama. And we also referred to these three types of samadhis which are mentioned in the Yoga Sutra. The Samyama, that is Dharana Dhyana Samadhi, then Samprajnata Samadhi and Asamprajnata Samadhi. It's called Sabija Samadhi and Nirbija Samadhi. Samadhi with an object and Samadhi without an object, without seed. So many of these ideas become more and more clear as we proceed further. And that's one unique feature of the Yoga Sutra literature. You can't say that you have completed, exhausted one topic in one sutra or in a set of sutras. Now we won't have anything to do with the same topic in the coming sutras. It's not like that. Yoga Sutras came into existence long before the very concept of writing a well-organized work originated. You know, they're all sutras. Must have been, Patanjali must have inherited from his own ancestors, the earlier sages, and he must have taught to his disciples in these 195 very, very pithy statements, which sometimes which are almost, I mean, unrecognizable, which we cannot make any sense of unless we read the same sutras in the light of the commentaries which are written on the sutras. Now, in general, I wanted to make a general overview, especially when it comes to this important subject of vibhutis. Now, as I mentioned, you know, Patanjali's system analyzes human mind and divides them into 5 categories. This is the first step in understanding Patanjali's approach to psychology. And now, the criterion that he uses for dividing into, classifying into these 5 categories is the structure of the antakarana. Antakarana, which actually in Patanjali's system, antakarana means chitta, because commentators like Vajaspati and others have emphasized the yoga chitta vritti nirodha, the definition of yoga. The chitta vritti is not just the ideas and emotions and feelings and tendencies, vrittis, samskaras, vasanas, etc., which all are related to some experience or actions in our life. They are not necessarily limited to mind. They are limited to the entire mental system, as we call in Vedanta. It's called antakarana, mean mana, buddhi, chitta, ahankara. Mind, intellect, then the repository of memories and impressions, which is called chittam in the Vedantic tradition, and ahankara, which means the sense of egoity, how we identify ourselves with something that we have seen or experienced in the past. For that, well, I have seen this person, last year. So there you have to send some I. So you remember, because the memory is deposited in the mental system. It's called a chitta. And you use your intellect to recognize. And then, before you actually recognize, your mind may be slightly confused. But it's the same person whom I met last year, or maybe somebody else. So that at that stage is called mind. So mind, intellect, memory system, and let us say egotism is called ahankara. Mana, buddhi, chitta, ahankara. It's called antakarana, or internal organs in the language of Vedanta. And also, we should take it the same sense when we use the word chittam in the Patanjali's language. Now, this chittam, this mental system, is divided into 5 categories. I mentioned this earlier: kshiptam, mudham, vikshiptam, ekagram, niruddham. Of which the last mentioned niruddha state is our goal, yoga. We are all striving to reach that goal. But we should remember, we won't be able to reach that goal at one leap. It may take sometimes evolution that goes on, maybe for different life cycles. Now, to get an idea, kshiptam means let's think of a lake full of muddy, dirty water. You can't see anything. Everything is mixed up. Like that, when our mind is completely restless, totally restless, absolutely confused, that state of mind is called a kshiptam. Remember, if you try to understand the first 2 stages of kshiptam and mudham, you have to understand it roughly corresponds to some of the abnormal states of human mind which are described in the modern psychiatry. It is the science of abnormal psychology. So the second stage is mudham, where the confusion is little less, but is sufficiently confused, sufficiently conflicted, so you cannot undertake any spiritual sadhana at that stage. You can see this. If you talk to a person who is suffering from very serious conflicts, he cannot really wait for a minute to read a book. So you must give him some, not intellectual work, he won't be able to do. So you may, well, if you apply Patanjali's system, a true psychiatrist or psychologist to tell such a person, you go to a nearby church or a temple, a holy place, and clean the whole place. So first, some kind of physical activity he can do. If you ask him to read a Sermon on the Mount, he can't, because kshiptam and mudham are abnormal states of mind. You cannot do any prayer. You cannot do any practice. You cannot even recite anything holy, because mind is so totally abnormally confused. So we won't deal with these 2 states. We don't deal with the kshiptam and mudham state. We are not going to discuss. The third stage is called vikshiptam. At that stage, what happens? Roughly, in Patanjali's system, he refers to that in some of the sutras that we already discussed. For example, Vyuthana Nirodha Samskaras are mentioned here. The Vyuthana Nirodha Samskaras, they emerge when slowly you are progressing from Vikshipta state to Ekagra state. So Vikshipta state means, well, you can certainly pray for some time. You can certainly do some spiritual sadhanas for some time. At the same time, you can't do it for a long time. You cannot do that. Because after some time, you get somewhat confused. Mind becomes calm and quiet for some time when you are attending a prayer. But after some time, mind loses its calmness and quietude. Now, this is the third state. Now, remember, the reason why this discussion is very relevant, we should remember There is one sutra that we already discussed very elaborately, the 6th sutra of Samadhipada. Sorry, Vibhudipada. The Vibhudipada discusses Tasya Bhumishu Viniyogaha. Tasya Bhumishu Viniyogaha. Tasya here means this samyama dharana dhyana samadhi. This concentration. You should practice stage by stage. So you should have finished the first stage and then you should go to the next stage. It's called Bhumi Jaya Kramayana. Bhumi Jaya Kramayana means, Bhumi means one stage, then another stage. So when we practice spiritual disciplines, we should practice it slowly. It's called Shanai, Shanai Ruparami. Gita also says the same. So we should do that. Why? Because Vikshipta state is the normal state of a spiritual seeker who is finding it difficult to practice concentration or meditation uninterrupted for a long time, but who is interested and who can certainly concentrate for some time. There are moments when he feels at home, and there are times when he is so totally confused. Now, this is the this state of the third state, where we all actually practice spiritual disciplines. For some time, mind is calm and quiet. So sometimes mind is disturbed. Now, the fourth state is important, ekagra. So this is the fourth state. At that time, a spiritual seeker will be able to do spiritual sadhanas of a more abstract, subtle type. For example, higher meditation, higher focus. Such devotees can meditate for a long time. Why? Because yamas and yamas are already established, and vikshita, that disturbed state of mind, is gone. So you are already focused on one ideal. So there is a transition from vikshipta state, third to fourth state, ekagra state, the fourth state. How do we travel this distance? As we practice more and more spiritual discipline, you find the disturbance gets slowly reduced, and you are able to practice, you are able to experience peace of mind, not only when you are in a temple or a holy place, but also in your home, in your workplace, in your interaction. When you are in Vikshipta state, the third state, when you are listening to a great talk, you are highly impressed. But after some time, your mind is suddenly, mind feels disturbed. Again, when you go to the temple next day, or a church, or Sunday, Sabbath, or anything for that matter, any traditional religious, or even you need not necessarily be a conventional follower of any religion. There are many people who practice spirituality, even beyond and without belonging to any conventional religious tradition. So Patanjali, interestingly, he looks upon agnostics and even atheists as his potential fans. That's why Patanjali's system has a great appeal. He doesn't ask you to request God to take care of everything, to have an eye on whatever we are doing, and to make sure that we are doing the right thing, otherwise give us a blow on the head. He doesn't ask us to look up to the heaven, to see the big man with the stick on with a list of do's and don'ts. No, actually, surprisingly, that's very interesting. And that is something which is not very well understood. People sometimes wrongly interpret Patanjali's system as agnostic. It is not agnostic. Actually, it is called Sweshara. Sweshara means Patanjali actually adds another category to Sankhya system. Because Sankhya philosophy takes into consideration two fundamental categories, eternal categories, Purusha and Prakriti, and also then three evolutes of Prakriti. That is Mahatattva, Ahankara, and then mind and 5 senses of perception, 5 senses of action, intellect. Everything is taken into 5 external elements, and their subtle forms and mantras. All these are considered to be evolutes of Prakriti in the Sankhya philosophy, which is really originally somewhat atheistic. God doesn't have an important place or any place in the original system of Sankhya, to be very frank with you. But Patanjali's system is called Sweshara Sankhya, I mean sometimes, because he adds the Ishara also as an additional category. So Patanjali's system is not agnostic and certainly not atheistic. But at the same time, he expects us to take care of our own feet. In fact, he wants us to stand on our feet and not on our head. Because sometimes we reduce the whole of yoga as a system of standing on our head, Hatha Yoga. But what Patanjali wants us to do is to make our own effort to be able to take care of our own spiritual destiny, that is standing on our feet, spiritually speaking. So Ekagra is the 4th state. At that state, you meditate, you listen to scriptures, you read scriptures, you internalize all these ideas, and then your mind becomes calm and quiet because it is focused on a great spiritual idea. At that state, slowly it starts moving through Niruddha state, the 5th state. Now, next question is, in the Niruddha state, in Indian philosophy in general, not only Patanjali system, but elsewhere, they talk about 7 stages called Sapta Bhumika. Bhumika means stage. A stage in our evolution towards this highest Niruddha state, where we should try to focus on. I mean, let us say it also in a way means 7 stages in spiritual evolution in general. So it's important for us to get an idea of this, because in the coming sutras, many of the sutras indirectly refer to these states. They're called Subhecha, Vicharana, Tanumanasa, Sattvapatti, Asamsakti, Padartha Bhavini, and Turyaga. These are the 7 states called Sapta Bhumikas. Of course, Vyasa in his commentary adds, he analyzes from a different angle. It is called Prathama Kalpika, Madhubhumika, Prajnajodi, Atikranta Bhavaniya. I mean, these kind of 4 kinds of yogis are mentioned in the commentaries of Vyasa. That is, the first one is, Prathama Kalpika, one who is practicing Samyama. They have reached a state called Samadhi Matram. The second, Madhubhumika, one who has attained Ritambara Prajna. I mean, Ritambara Prajna in common sense language can mean an insight, a far sight, when mind becomes full of sattvic qualities. Trigunas and their interplay actually play an important role in this evolution. When you reach a state through yoga practice, you reach a point when you are able to approach everything from a settled view. You may call it intuition. That's called prajna. Prakashena jnayate prajna. You know certain things not by reading, not by listening, but internally you develop a system within our mind with which we are able to get a correct, accurate idea of things. Intellect plays an important role in our cognition, comprehension. That's true. Instinct is at a lower level. Instinct also sometimes works, but you need reason, intellect, you need reasoning power and intellect to get a clear idea of what you are doing or what is the situation you are facing. But beyond that, there is a state where you are able to understand things with unerring, with accurate precision, spontaneously, effortlessly. That particular skill becomes natural to yogis when they reach this level. It is called Ritambhara Prajna. So now this particular quality, it happens only when we reach a higher level. Prajna Jyoti. And then beyond that, but at this level also one may fall a victim to temptation. That could happen. But beyond Prajna Jyoti, when you reach this Adikranta Bhavaniya, a person who has attained Viveka Khyadi and it's a plane called Vishoga is actually moving towards this this Asamprajna, the Yoga Asamprajna, the Samadhi. Well, I'm explaining all these because when we practice yoga, when we do any spiritual practice, any spiritual discipline, some of these qualities will develop. But the highest state is as a vibhuti, the state where a yogi develops the ability to understand things as they are. He is able to look at something, listen to something, comprehend something for what it is. It is a complete comprehension. You can see this in the life of Sri Ramakrishna. You know, sometimes this is in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, which is actually a diary. You know, if you read, some people came to him, a small room in a temple where he was living. He looked at them. They will tell many things, but he will look at them and talk to them in a manner as if he could see their mind, as he could see the wall or of the room or maybe the temple outside, which he can see physically with the same physical clarity and precision. He could understand what was going on in the person's mind. Now, how does this happen? That's a result of some of these skills. Okay, now one important, so these are the 4 stages. And Shubhecha, I shall give a brief description of these Sapta Bhumikas, which are very important, especially those who practice Dharana, Tasya Bhumishu Viniyogaka. When they practice concentration, that is Dharana, Dhyana, and Samadhi, they should do it in an ascending order of stages. After having completed the earlier stage, they should move on to the next and higher stage. Subhecha, that's the first stage. You know, we can easily relate this in our own life. A lot of job, a lot of problems, a lot of difficulties. You work hard. You may be helping a person. He may be doing wonderful job. You are very loyal to the office, whatever it is, company, you are working. Still, you are not fully satisfied. So there is no other problem. Plenty of money, job, house, everything. Still, there is a recurring feeling of dissatisfaction in the mind. At that stage, you have a strong desire. I need something more, something higher. In fact, without this Subhecha, we won't be listening to the Yoga Sutra lectures, really. Because there are many wonderful things going on around us. Eye-catching, very wonderful. You may forget everything watching that. But after that, again, the mind again faces a big stone. And then to forget that, people take to drugs. And again, they watch the hobbies and all that. After several years, well, this is not enough. I want something higher. That is called Subhecha. It's common to everyone. Shubha means something auspicious. Icha means desire. Desire for something auspicious. That is a natural first step in our spiritual evolution. The second is called Vicharana. The second bhumika is called Vicharana. Then what happens, then after having completed the first stage, after having developed this desire for something higher, go to the library, read a book, then suddenly you come across some flyer. It tells you there are some wonderful discussions, lectures going on some spiritual subjects, and you try to subscribe it, maybe into YouTube or whatever it is. That is Vicharana, means you already start practicing something, feeding your mind with some good spiritual food. And then mind slowly evolves, mind slowly develops, and this becomes a strong, not just a desire, but a strong tendency. Slowly mind emerges to higher level. The third stage is called Tanumanasa. At this stage, you have listened to many wonderful ideas. So we have a strong desire to practice renunciation, spiritual wisdom, restraint, self-restraint, a desire for something higher, higher values, higher spiritual evolution. So that is Tanumanasa. So what happens at this stage? Sankalpas and Vikalpas, wavering of the mind, this sudden attraction towards something, and immediately its opposite, coming one after another. That is gone. Mind has settled. At least mind has started getting settled down. It's called Tanumanasa. Sattwapatti, that's a fourth stage. And what happens, when our mind gets immersed or be completely attracted towards higher things, spiritual discipline, spiritual ideas. When our antakarana, mind, intellect, memory system, and also sense ego system, all get surcharged with some spiritual vibration, spiritual interest. When spiritual ideas ideas that will take us beyond the world of the senses, beyond the world of the fleeting experiences of happiness and unhappiness. That becomes our main goal. That determines our actions and feelings. That is called Sattwapatti. The fifth state is called Asamsakti. And what happens, this is a higher stage. And when you reach this state, we are no more drawn towards material things. It's not that we run away from it, but rather they cease to be attractive to our mind. Our mind is no longer attracted towards anything that belongs to the worldly pleasures and things like that. That state is called Asamsakti. The sixth stage is called Padartha Bhavi. That means at this stage, all our external actions, worldly desires, everything could completely eradicated. And of course, this is an advanced stage. And the seventh stage called seventh bhumika, the seventh stage, Turyaga. Of course, that is the highest state when we get immersed in this higher spiritual idea. Now, why these are important? When we discuss Yoga Sutras, we should always remember when we understand intellectually something, and then when we come to a conclusion, it makes a lot of sense. It is very wonderful. We should do that. There is always a problem. We sometimes mislead ourselves into thinking that what attracts us intellectually is something that we have already attained. Mind plays a trick. It's a very important point, remember. Well, at a physical level, you don't think so. You book a ticket to go to New York. You don't assume that you have reached New York. Absolutely no. You have booked a ticket, you know what plane you are going to take, you have made all arrangements to go to the airport, everything. But you know very well that you have not reached New York. But in spiritual life, especially when we read yoga, books like Yoga Sutras, sometimes people think, well, I have reached this stage, this Tanumanasa. Now I can go to the next stage. Reaching Tanumanasa doesn't mean reading a few sentences on that book, on the subject in a book. You have to walk, you have to travel. Then only we reached. So that's why we have to remember. That's why this the sixth sutra of the Samadhipada is very important. That is Tasya Bhumishu Viniyoga. Bhumishu means in their gradual stage, 1, 2, 3. From 1 we should go to 2. We should not imagine we have reached 3rd or 4th or 5th stage. Otherwise, we know what happens. Of course, at a purely psychological level, it can lead to delusions. Delusions are some of the common problems that people face when they don't understand this important thing. A concept or an idea is something. Even attraction to a great idea or a great concept is something. But having reached that state is something totally different. Booking a ticket to New York is one thing. Traveling 6 hours and reaching there and doing your work and returning is something totally different. So now we'll go to the 13th sutra. Yes, that is Etena Bhudendriyeshu Dharmalakshanavastha Parinama Vyakhyata. This is the this is the 13th sutra. So what this sutra actually says is something very significant. Etena, that is the 3 types of transformations we discussed earlier. The 3 types of transformations we have to remember. We already discussed 3 types of transformations. That is what called 3 types of parinamas we discussed. That is Samadhi Parinama, the lower stage, then Ekagrita Parinama, the second higher, and the Nirodha Parinama, the third, through spiritual practices. The 13th Sutra tells us that these parinamas, these changes are applicable not only in the context of mind, but also in the context of, with regard to the 11 senses and external elements, the external world. We will understand this very soon. We already discussed just now the 3 transformations of the human mind we already discussed. That is 3 types of parinamas we discussed earlier. That is Samadhi Parinama, and that is discussed in the 11th sutra. And higher than Samadhi Parinama is Ekagrita Parinama, that is discussed in the 12th sutra. And then the highest state is Nirodha Parinama, discussed in the 9th sutra, where all Uthana, all outgoing tendencies get completely suppressed by simultaneously emerging higher thoughts at the subconscious level. This is the essence of samyama. Now, what this particular sutra tells us is, these transformations take place not only in the context of mind, but also in the context of our senses and also in the external world. Etena purvoktena chitta parinamena dharma lakshanavastha rupena Bhutendriyeshu dharma parinamo, lakshana parinamo, avastha parinamascha, ukta veditavyaha. So, what this sutra tells us is, there are three types of transformations that take place. Those transformations are dharma parinama, that is parinama or change with regard to form or nature. Lakshana parinama, transformation that takes place with regard to time. Avastha parinama, the transformation that takes place in the external world with regard to status. I will explain this slowly one after another, not just now. Now, first of all, what is dharma? Parinama, transformation with regard to dharma. Dharma means form or nature. We can find that things change in their form. For example, gold is an example from external world. What the sutra tells us is, transformation, parinama is inevitable for everything. Our senses, 5 senses of perception, 5 senses of action. If they undergo changes, we know they undergo changes in time, and they undergo changes with regard to form, they undergo changes with regard to status, that is avastha. An example of dharma parinama, for example, gold. Gold becomes earring, it can become a bracelet, necklet, whatever it is. Similarly, our senses also can take different form as we get aged. The hand is a karmendriya, a sense of action, or the eyes, an example of sense of perception, sense of sight. I'm giving some examples from the category of the senses of perception and senses of action. They undergo change in their nature and form. So here Patanjali is telling us what we all know, but he is actually educating us to take a philosophical view of life and everything that we interact with in this world. In fact, that is the essence of Yoga Sutra. If you read Yoga Sutra, even Vibhuti he talks about different powers, we call supernatural powers, etc. As we go deeper, you understand they're really not supernatural. Supernatural is the only word we can use because it cannot be explained or understood in the context of the available tools of modern science and technology or laboratory. So in that sense, we may call it supernatural. But if we read Patanjali's system, we'll understand they are natural, really speaking. Just as physical entities change their forms in the past, present, and future, and also in the brilliance called avastha parinama. For example, something may lose its brilliance in course of time. It may become more brilliant after some time. This avastha, an example of avastha parinama. A gold can become an earring. It can become some other kind of ornament. An example of dharma parinama. And again, it also can change according to time, the passage of time. It's called lakshana parinama. These are 3 parinamas mentioned here. This happens to Ekadasi Indriyas, I mean 11 Indriyas, 11 senses. Remember, mind is sometimes considered to be one of the senses in many of the textbooks on Indian philosophy, because though mind is the supreme commander of all the 5 senses of perception and 5 senses of action, mind decides what you see with your eyes and what you recognize with your eyes. How you interpret what you see is decided, determined by the mind. But in the broader context, you find mind also is sometimes included in the category of indriyas, means senses. It's called ekadasha indriya, means 11 senses. 5 senses of perception, 5 senses of action, and mind. They also undergo this dharma parinama, dakshana parinama, and avastha parinama. So dharma parinama is example is gold becoming some other earring or something. And then lakshana parinama, it means anagata, atita, vartamana, means something yet to come, something which is already over, something which is existing right in front of us. These are examples of this lakshana parinama. Now, that's why the Vyasa's commentary says, etena purvoktena chitta parinamena dharma lakshana avastha rupena bhudendriyeshu dharma parinamo lakshana parinamo avastha parinamas ukta veditavyaha. Just like the transformations that happen to mind, I mean chittam, the same transformations happen to senses also, that means. Now, the third one is the avastha parinama. Sometimes bright, sometimes dull. They lose their brilliance, they lose their effectiveness. All these are examples of avastha parinama. So these changes happen to external world also. Parinama is the central mechanism, philosophically speaking, which is at the heart of the Sankhya philosophy. And yoga philosophy is based on Sankhya philosophy. So parinama is very important. So dharma parinama we already understood. It's called, samskaras, change, nature, then parinama in terms of time. For example, vikshipta, an example. Vikshipta state is an example for this lakshana parinama. Once for some time we become extremely happy. When we are practicing spiritual discipline, we are happy. After some time, that happiness is gone because a number of outgoing tendencies. Again, after some time, the happiness is returned, samyama comes. It's a vikshipta. Then the third is intensity, as I mentioned, avastha parinama. Sometimes it's called, it is called madhyama tivra, etc. Murdu madhyama tivra, these Sanskrit terms are used. Mind, senses, external things also can undergo changes with regard to the status, with regard to the effectiveness. And that is in terms of intensity. So time, one factor, that is dharma parinama, and then, this form is dharma parinama, time is lakshana parinama, and status is avastha parinama. So these changes are happening in everything. And these changes happen all the time. So the whole dynamics of evolution is described in these sutras. How evolution happens to our senses, our eyes, our ears, our sense of touch, sense of smell, sense of taste, and how evolutions happen to our senses of action, the feet with which you walk, the hands with which you do things, like that. All the senses of action also undergo changes. Plus, how mind also suddenly becomes happy and unhappy. So, this particular sutra emphasizes this important point, that is, parinama takes place not only to human mind, but also to external things. That is thus, etena bhudendriyeshu. The sutra is Bhuda means the 5 elements, Panchamahabhutas, the external phenomenal world. Everything undergoes changes. The oceans, the rivers, the whole cosmos, the earth, the stars, everything undergoes change. That idea. The whole dynamics of change, which is at the very root of Patanjali's system of creation. That is explained here. And he says the same dynamics of change applies to our mind and also our senses as well. Vyakhyadaha. Etena means the same as mentioned earlier. Now we'll go to maybe we will discuss the 14th and 15th sutras, which are very important. You can discuss this. You can, those who have got the text can look at the 14th sutra. The 13th sutra is very elaborately commented, expounded by Vyasa Bhashya. So I'm not going into those details. It's a very famous, very elaborate commentary. We can do justice to the class only by giving a brief analysis of it. That's all. Now we can do 14th sutra. 14th sutra is Shandodida Avyapadeshya Dharma Anupadi. That is the 14th sutra. Please remember. Shanta Udida Avyapadeshya Dharma Anupadi. These are the words that constitute the sutra. Shanta Udida Avyapadeshya Dharma Anupadi. Shanta. Shanta here means something that has already occurred, that's already over, past. Udida means something which has just arisen, the present. Avyapadeshya means something that is yet to come, that's not yet happened, belongs to future. What the sutra tells us is, what is dharmi is explained. Dharmi means something which has got certain properties, and dharma means those properties, characteristics of things. It is a sutra we define these two words, dharmi and dharma. Dharma means characteristics, properties, peculiar aspects of something. They are called dharma. Dharmi is something which has got those properties and characteristics. These characteristics and properties can be something that belongs to the past, atida, vartamana or anagata, means it could be shanta, it could be udida, it could be avyapadeshya. That means everything happens. The whole creation, everything is changing and evolving. And in the next sutra, Patanjali will tell you that these changes, the secret of changes is not because of dharmi, the entity which has got the characteristics that changes, but the characteristics themselves change. Like in chemistry, kramanyatvam parinamanyatva hetu. What the sutra tells you is, why different things emerge? Not because dharmi changes, but because dharma changes. For example, a pot, the same entity, dharmi is the same. You break it, it becomes powder. In fact, this Vyasa Bhashya says, Tadyadha churnamrut, pindamrut, ghadamrut, kanamrut, iti kramaha means. What it says is, same pot, after some time, in course of time, it can have another state. So you can find dharma changes, dharma parinama happens, lakshana parinama happens, avastha parinama happens. A pot becomes a little, maybe a small quantity of mud or soil when you break it, and maybe a small quantity of clay can become a pot or some other entity. So all these changes take place because dharmas change, the properties and characteristics change. In fact, this actually, somebody who may read all these in the light of modern evolution may be tempted to agree with Charles Darwin. I'm not a specialist in that area of knowledge, but you'd find Patanjali was an evolutionist with one difference. He always believed there is a dharmi, something, and he remains the same, but dharma's characteristics and properties change. And he believed in two fundamental categories, Prakriti and Purusha. But the concept of evolution and change, which explain the reality of various entities, multiplicity of different things in the world, that is a unique concept that comes from Patanjali among Indian philosophers. It's called evolutionist. That's why 15th Sutra tells you Kramanyatvam Parinamanyate Hetu. That means when we see different things happening, when the same entity becomes different things, it only means that the properties and characteristics undergo change. Yo yasya dharmasya samanantaro dharmas satasya krama pindaga pratyavade ghadopajayade iti dharma parinama krama. That means after one important characteristic is replaced by another characteristic, then a new entity comes into existence. For example, first you have got the clay which is in the form of powder. That's called murtiga dharmi churnam. Means it is its nature, its form is the form of clay powder, and it becomes pindam. It becomes maybe in olden days, you know how they used to make pots from clay, wet clay. First they will make a ball, and from that they may make a clay pot. Like that, different things. So that's why Patanjali says that changes take place to mind. Just like Samadhi Parinama, Ekagrata Parinama, and Nirodha Parinama. It's an ascending order of our spiritual evolution into Samadhi state, Nirodha state. Now, the same kind of changes we can see happening in the world, the phenomenal empirical world. And also, the same changes happen to our senses and also to our mind. That's an important discussion. Now, all these discussions are meant to explain one important thing. The so-called powers or vibhudis, supernatural powers, as they're sometimes called in the third chapter, Vibhudipada, they are really not supernatural. They are the natural result of certain parinamas that happen. Just as when we meditate, when we pray, when we read a holy book, when we chant some holy names, actually a mind undergoes change. Somebody asked me this question during one of the sessions. Suppose you have a problem. Two persons have the same problem, maybe depression or whatever it is. One person is given a medicine and he sits quiet. The other person is asked to pray and he also keeps quiet after some time. So modern science will tell you the second one who prayed, he is not cured. But he has come calm and quiet because his mind has changed. The medicine has changed his mind, of course. What kind of change it is, I don't want to say. The prayer changes the mind at a different dimension. So the meditation changes the mind. Reading a book, you are looking for something that disturbed. You go to a library, you read a wonderful book that you liked, even not necessarily spiritual book. You maybe read a poetry, read some higher books, sublime books of literature, history, philosophy, and so on. Immediately you feel a great sense of tranquility and peace. The mind is actually undergoing change. That's what Patanjali says. Now that change happens to the external world also, which everyone knows, which can be verified by any physicist. So we will discuss the coming sutras in the next session. Now we can have interaction. Thank you.
Maharaj, namaskar. Maharaj, when you were just saying that these results are not supernatural, it is a natural transformation by action of these activities that they perform, prayer or meditation or something. How do we distinguish between something supernatural and something natural? Because I think the typical understanding of something supernatural is when people are not able to explain step by step why something happens, they call it supernatural. And in this particular context, the idea is you pray and something happens. So how does that go from being supernatural to natural?
Question is very relevant, very rational question. No, suppose um, uh, a musician, maybe a poet or a musician, he attends a scientific conference. Uh, Maybe Nobel Prize winning scientists are explaining some complicated principles they may have discovered. I think the poet or the medical doctor may not be able to fully understand what the scientist is actually explaining, really speaking. And a physicist may not be able to understand if you explain something from information technology. So, in order to understand things properly, we should place ourselves in their position. We should also have that kind of training that enables us to understand and appreciate something new. So that's one important thing to remember. Of course, I must always admit one, unfortunately, one fact that this is the whole idea is being hijacked. It has been falsely, wrongly interpreted and used and misused by people, saying that this is something that they don't have, and this is that. Of course, that's the main problem. The greatness of Patanjali is so rational and he's so scientific. He says, um, to take come back to your question, give direct answer. Now, one should be able to suppose a person has prayed and he is benefited, he has received wonderful benefit from that. Whether it is actually true or not, another person who is a scientist, he cannot judge whether it is genuine or not unless he also is able to pray the way the other person has prayed. Just as you may not be able to understand what a Nobel Prize winning medical practitioner explains something in modern medicine because you are not a doctor. You can understand if somebody belongs to your area of specialization, explain something. Like that, you know what happens when we try to verify certain things, we should be able to look at the subject from the other person's perspective. So, how many people are willing to or ready to take the pains to undergo this kind of disciplines that Patanjali is talking about, yamas, niyamas, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhi. And then you say that it doesn't work, it's all fake. But without practicing all days, if you simply say, oh, this is absolutely wrong because I don't understand it. I may not understand it, that doesn't mean it is wrong. I have to reach, I can't say Einstein is wrong because I don't understand Einstein. I'm not a physicist. But I cannot say he's wrong. There are people who say he was right, really speaking. Similarly, those who take the trouble to practice what Patanjali says, and then go ahead, then he will understand it is natural. So that's an important point to remember. What is beyond our understanding, sometimes we brand it as something supernatural. And but when you go to these great works on Indian philosophy, whether it's devotional philosophy or Advaita philosophy or yoga philosophy, you find everything is so clearly, scientifically, rationally explained. That's the idea behind it.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Actually, Patanjali is preparing the ground to lead us to the conclusion that it is a different area where you are turning your own mind to a laboratory. You are experimenting with your mind. The laboratory is our own mind. When we practice meditation, actually, we are not going to a laboratory outside. We are going to our own mind. And when we do that, then our mind also evolves. And we won't understand that evolution unless we do that. Just as unless you go to a laboratory and do experiments, you won't be able to understand the fact of the discovery in chemistry, whatever it is. That's all.
Namaskaram, Swamiji. I had a question about vasanas. You mentioned about basically the 4 parts of the antakarana, mind, intellect, chitta, and ankara. So is vasana part of the chittam, or is it part of something else?
Yeah. Vasanas are related to chitta, the memory, because vasanas are nothing but our tendency to do certain things when we recollect something from our past memory. And these memories are deposited in that compartment of the antakarana called chitta. Chittam is a repository of vasanas also, because vasanas are in the form of memories. When we recollect, of course, vasanas are unconscious recollection. It's an important point to remember. When we consciously recollect, that is one thing. Vasanas are really, they belong to the subconscious level. Our inherent aptitude and attitude. Only when we try to introspect and try to analyze, why did I do it the way I did? Why did I speak that word? Why did I talk like that? Then you, oh yes, this is the reason why I talk like that. So sometimes it is coming from the unconscious level, because subconscious level. So vasanas belong to subconscious level. Chittam actually, it works at the subconscious level. It is a memory system, repository of past impressions and memories. So vasanas can be purified once you understand you have a vasana which is not so very good. You can neutralize that vasana by creating a counter vasana. So that's a very, very, very scientific system. When we discuss this elaborately, when we discuss Kriya Yoga and the early part of the sadhana part.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Maharaj, I have a question about the admonition about too rapid speed. I was thinking that over the last century and a half, so to speak, in the industrial age and now in the electronic or digital age, the speed of many things, of circumstances, of behavior have been, beyond what the speed of life was when there was closer connection to the natural world. And consequently, this admonition about not rushing the spiritual evolution is interesting. I'm wondering how we can tie that together, because there's a turgidity with the overly contemplative, and that gets so out of sync with the circumstances and requirements of modern life that there's sometimes a dissonance or a difficulty that many spiritual seekers have. And yet here's the admonition: don't go crazy with it. Don't make yourself destabilized by trying to go beyond where you're really at.
I mean, yeah, true. How to live, how to appreciate and promote spiritual values, spiritual life as an ideal in this modern complex world, which is the result of industrialization and so on. That's true. I think simple. Of course, when I gave the list of the 7 Bhumika stages. I was just, it was maybe for academic value only, because I don't mean that of any direct relevance to our everyday life. But one should understand, because it's part of the yoga philosophy. But I think simple practices like meditation, promoting values through literature, through music, higher values, that can help us to sustain and preserve our spiritual tradition, spiritual heritage, even in this complex world. Of course, the pace of changes, the pace of revolutionary changes, radical changes happening every day, that was new challenges before us, new questions, new problems. It's true. But then, if you look at the history of the world, in every age, in every era, there were just a small number, a minority, few, who somehow preserved certain higher values. And that's how we are reading Patanjali system. That's why we are able to preserve some of the ancient values. So we cannot, of course, modern era, modern age is different from many previous eras. Of course, there's a big problem. IT especially completely radically changed everything. But I believe some of these practices can be preserved. Modern facilities, modern developments like information technology can be used as an effective, a constructive tool for promoting these values, the higher values.
Thank you, Maharaj. The hunger for higher values is obviously there.
Always there. That just be always there. Small number of people who really go for something. Of course, there is always a problem. Sometimes people want to put a charcoal in wonderful package. That problem is the spirituality. Even the Patanjali yogas, many of these great ideas are being hijacked. Sometimes they want to popularize. Very often, that popularization makes them disloyal to the heritage. That is a great tragedy. So we should keep our loyalty to a tradition. See, instead of referring to the original sutras, instead of referring to Vyasa's commentary, we sometimes there is a tendency to interpret not only Yoga Sutras, spirituality in general, in simplistic, very often questionable language. In using modern jargon, under the pretext everything should be understandable, intelligible, easy, simple for everyone. They don't apply that principle in medicine and engineering. They're ready to work hard to study medicine and engineering. People go to any length to experiment modern weapon systems, missile systems, modern maybe aircraft carriers and nuclear submarines. People are ready to go to any extent, work very hard, very sincerely, with great intensity to develop many of these things. Now, why can't we give a little of that intensity also to study some of these ancient values? It may be coming from Socrates and Aristotle. It may be coming from Buddha or Christ or Patanjali or Shankaracharya or Siddhanta. Like that. So, the problem today is we want everything new. So if you tell somebody, well, Patanjali is placing before you, presenting before you this great spiritual scheme, this plan, which is very interesting. People want to know, I want to practice pranayama, immediately I want something, I want to read other people's mind and things like that. But you can't go to an engineering college and say, I want to be an engineer tomorrow. They will ask you to study there for decades. You can't be a doctor. Go to medical college and tell, I want to be a doctor in a day or two. You can't do that. The same principle applies in other areas of learning also. That's an important thing to remember. So, but then many people are not willing to tell these spiritual aspirants. See, just as you are ready to wait several years before you become a doctor, before you are allowed to practice in a hospital, similarly, You have to study these books, these scriptures for some years in order to be able to teach and understand. Follow the point? That's an important thing to remember. So when it comes to philosophy and spirituality, everything should be in capsule form, everything be readily intelligible. You should say something which everyone understands. You can't say that you can go to engineering college and tell the professor, you tell me everything one right now. They will ask you to wait for several years before you actually are recognized to be an engineer. The same patience, same effort and preparations, at least maybe not to that extent, at least 1/10 of that effort and intensity. You can, you should allow for philosophy also. Yeah. Thank you. We have still 10 minutes, so plenty of time for discussion.
Go ahead, Neeru.
Hi, Swamiji. I have a question. So something that's been quite prominent during lockdown, COVID, the idea of loneliness, isolation, something that, you know, everybody has sort of contended with. I'm curious what Patanjali has to say about that and what the Yoga Sutras teach us about how to deal with things like that.
You mean, in what way Patanjali's system or his philosophy could be relevant to people living this lockdown days? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and specifically in terms of the like being isolated or the sense of, you know, loneliness that might come with that.
Yeah, really, I'm very happy to tell you that the number of viewers and listeners to this class increased maybe at least 10 times, more than 10 times during this lockdown. I mean, everyday viewers. So I think when you are facing a problem outside, like lockdown and a lot of other, and that outside problem compels you to live a very restrained, limited life within your own place, that sometimes can become a blessing in disguise, can prompt us to think about higher values in life. Higher, I mean, what is the essence of human life? See, suddenly you find a tiny virus can become a threat, a life-threatening monster that threatens human life, that disrupted social life, national life in many countries and continents. So that can make us think, that can make us philosophers, in the sense, make us think of the ultimate value of life, its meaning. So in that respect, Patanjali, and again, Patanjali presents before us a way to refine our mind, to refine our sensibility, to take a fresh look at the whole essence of living in this world, life as a whole. So that's an important thing. So it can become a very creative, constructive pastime to listen to Patanjali's system of the exposition during this time. Yeah. And again, when your mind is active, when mind is dealing with these higher ideas, it becomes fresh, it becomes more active, healthy. Remember, the mind also needs good food. There's a physical body. Mind also needs good food. Frequently that we often neglect. So a physically stalwart, healthy person becomes restless and total, without a clear understanding as to what is living for, what's ultimate goal in human life. That is a terrible thing. So it is very important to give good food to the mind as it is important to give good food to the body.
Right, there's a question on YouTube. Again, it's all about the reference to Ishvara by Patanjali.
Yeah.
The question is in Samadhi Pada, Patanjali makes God one of the options.
Yeah.
In Sadhana Pada, in the definition of Kriya Yoga, it's all about surrendering to God. So the question is God central part of Patanjali's sutra, or can one practice it without God?
Yeah. Patanjali's system accepts the reality of God, but not in the same way. But Patanjali's God is not the capital letter G. God is a creator, sustainer of the whole creation. It's not a paramount person, P capital, as you find in the monotheistic religious systems. So in the Sadhanapada, Ishvara Pranidhanat Va, where Patanjali says. In fact, there are commentators in Patanjali Yoga system who tell you that Ishvara Pranidhana, resignation to God, can automatically help you to imbibe values like yamas and nemas. So that's why Vajaspati and other Vijnana Bhikshu, some of them quote elaborate verses from devotional scriptures like Bhagavata Purana, Gita, and so. That's very interesting. So if you can resign to God, if you can resignation to God in the higher sense, again we have to remember what kind of God are they talking about? God who is a compassion. It's not created God the way we understand in Abrahamic religion that is mentioned here. Because that can also be, but Patanjali's reference is a compassionate God who listens, who takes care of persons, who listens to your prayers, and without your being aware of it, helps you in your spiritual path. That kind of higher idea is mentioned here. In the other context, Samadhivad elsewhere, God idea comes there. There, it is the God idea is related to Prakriti Lina Purusha, I mean, those who are highly evolved, spiritually evolved idea. That's idea. So there are two views on with regard to Patanjali's conception of God. The first one is more or less similar to the compassionate God who listens to your prayers, who helps you in your problems, and who is equally accessible to everyone, who is the God of the whole creation. In that sense, not a particular name, but he doesn't mention name. God idea is implied here. And as you question, Ishvara is sometimes considered to be a 26th category in the yoga system. There are commentators like that. Because otherwise, as in Sankhya system, yoga system also has got 25 categories, 25 elements. I mean, Prakriti and Purusha, two fundamental eternal categories. Then 23 evolutes of Prakriti. So total 25. So Prakriti cannot be detached from the 23 evolutes of Prakriti. So in the broad sense, Prakriti and Purusha. But if you elaborate further, Prakriti has got 23 evolutes, Mahatattva, Ahangara, Sattva Ahangara, Tamasika Ahangara, Rajasika Ahangara, and then from the mind and the five senses of perception, 5 senses of action, then the Pancha Tanmatras and Pancha Mahabhutas, like that, So 23 evolutes of Prakriti and Prakriti 24 and Purusha 25. There are commentators, there are interpreters who tell you that Ishvara is another category. It's a matter of opinion. It cannot be denied. This is not very relevant in our context, of course.
Maharaj, one last question, maybe. In the Sapta Bhumikas, as you go to Asamasakti and towards Turiya, Turiyam, the question is, will the actions in the world, how do they deal with their being active in the world rather than being a recluse? It's more of a confusion. But yes, Maharaj.
And in fact, as I mentioned once, when you read about Saptabhumikas, or we read about the 4 types of yoga that Vyasa mentions, so you have to remember, it's a fact, the Patanjali system was originally meant to the individual spiritual seeker, not for society. This is important thing. Historically, many people, of course, they say Patanjali yoga for everyone, yoga for dummies, yoga for whole society, yoga for global tranquility and so on. But remember, Patanjali's yoga system was fundamentally meant for the individual spiritual aspirant. Historically, it's a fact. We cannot deny that. But in course of time, especially during the last 200 years, Patanjali system has become well known. But you have to remember certain important disciplines like yamas and niyamas are so universal, so relevant for the whole humanity, not only for spiritual seekers, even for people who don't care for any spiritual values. For them also, yamas and niyamas are of supreme relevance and significance. And then asana, pranayama, or these two also. Pratyahara, dharana is something different. But yamas and niyamas are of supreme importance. Asana and pranayama also can be of universal application. But after that, dharana, dhyana, samadhi, the samyama part of it, 6th, 7th, and 8th, they actually are meant for, together called samyama is meant for the individual spiritual seeker. So if we ask the question, in what way we can accommodate this in our everyday active life, actually you have to remember, is essentially the samyama, the higher practices are meant for the individual spiritual seeker who can live in a solitary life away from active engagement in professional duties and responsibilities. It's a fact. It's important. Especially the Sapta Bhumikas, which actually ascending order to Nirodha state. They are not meant for the individual spiritual seeker. Is a fact. Though today we teach the meditation, Nimandhar, we teach to whole groups. That's a fact. But it is, Patanjali would not have minded that. He would have appreciated that. He would have congratulated that what he actually meant for the individual spiritual seeker is now given a new dimension. But we should remember, originally it was meant for the individual spiritual seeker, especially dharana, dhyana, and samadhi.
Thank you, Maharaj. No more questions. We are at the end.
Thank you. I hope no more, I think. So we'll
no more, Maharaj. We can conclude.
Thank you. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Pranamastu.